And now it's my pleasure to introduce Gabe, Los Altos City Manager, to give us a State of Los Altos briefing.
Thank you, David. Happy to be here. I've been here about a year now, and each time I do a speech or anything like that, I'm starting to recognize more and more people. And I think today I've actually met, at least by email, I think everyone on the call today. So that is exciting for me personally. I'm pretty informal. So if we're going through things and you want to stop and talk about a point, I'll just let, I guess David's going to moderate. So if you raise your hand, he can call or you can put it in the chat. The point is, it's fine to interrupt me, and I will be happy to answer any questions on any points that you want to talk about. So I've got it up. And when I was putting this together, the topic, the State of Los Altos, was interesting to me. And I went back and I looked at presentations I had done really soon after I started here, all the way up to the last one I did with Los Altos residents a few weeks ago. And to me, looking back over the past year, it really showed how far the organization has come, personnel-wise and budget-wise, and kind of what we've discovered along the way. So we have our budget presentation going to council on June 14th, so week after next, for adoption. And I realized that through the course of the first year, almost everything I've worked on has been either personnel or budget. And for today, for the State of Los Altos, those are the two things that I wanted to focus on. So we're entering, I guess, the third year of the pandemic now. And this is the longest emergency response, any local government administrator has been a part of. But responding to a crisis is not new for governments. Governments are used to it, whether it's a single discrete event, a couple-day event, recovery from earthquake or fire. Governments are pretty good at this for the most part. And every crisis I've went through, when I sit back down and I look at where the organization was before the event happened and where it went, there's a lot of things are true, but the two categories I've always been able to put things into is that a crisis is going to reinforce what is known about your organization going into it, and it's really going to expose what is unknown. So going into COVID, or at least when I got on board, what did we know about ourselves? We knew we had exceptional police department, really strong public works crews, dedicated staff. We know that council had made really good policy decisions to start protecting the community during the initial response of the pandemic. As we got further into it, we started to get exposed a little bit, particularly in the area of personnel. We recognized that we had failed to provide adequate working conditions or acceptable pay in the marketplace. Our operations, we started to recognize that by choosing not to invest in our assets over times and eliminate critical maintenance or care, we started to see a lot of our assets that had been stressed begin to fail. And in budget, we spent down our reserves very rapidly. We're below our minimum established thresholds. When you pair that up with not budgeting for known costs, we get into the situation on the budget where we're at today. So as we sit here today, for example, our general fund balance is down to about 15%. Our minimum should be 20%. A healthy organization is substantially higher than that. But we were at a point where we know that we need to start adapting and making changes to the areas that we've been exposed. And part of the thing we'll talk about in the budget that is a transition year is that's what we intend to do. So with that, we'll get into the state of the city as far as personnel goes. One thing you'll learn about me, and Anthony, who is feeding his son Cal right now, knows about me, is I like memes in presentations. So this, when the Great Resignation started, this one made its rounds on Twitter. Health experts recommend standing up at your desk, leaving your office, and never coming back. We make light of that, but in Los Altos, our turnover annually is 28%. So people have started to take that seriously. In addition to that, over the past 3 years, 50% of our managers have left the organization. And in that same time frame, 72% of our executive management has left the organization. So when you start talking about continuity, the ability to see projects through or to build towards something, and you have turnover where 3 out of 4 of your executives aren't with the organization, it makes that difficult. And one of the things I like to look at is exit interviews when trying to determine what it is that's driving people away from the organization. This one in particular, I think I have 2 more quotes in here. This one in particular stuck out to me: the no stability and the constant turnover, not enough resources to do the job. The question that we asked there is, what's your primary reason for leaving Los Altos? And when we talk about how this organization operates, we looked at just the management level, but this slide shows the entire organization. That 51% of our entire organization has been here less than 5 years. And we've got some service levels at the 5 to 9 and some at 20 plus, but we really also miss the middle of the organization, where the people that have served here the longest tend to be the frontline employees, the ones that do the work. And we love having longevity there. But what we don't have is a middle or top management level of the organization that has any time with Los Altos. And the example we use here typically is either engineering, who builds or oversees the building of the infrastructure, or finance. And in this case, when you see there's 11 people, 8 of them have been here less than 5 years. I could break this down further to where I think 6 of the 8 have been here less than 18 months. Number of full-time employees in finance with a tenure longer than 1 year, it's 1. The entire finance department is new. When I went through my interview with council, they were very excited, and they told me that they had held the finance director position open for me to hire, which I really appreciated. What they didn't tell me is they had also held the finance manager position open and 3 accountant positions and our AP person as well. So everyone in finance has been here less than 1 year with the exception of 1 employee. We went out for a mid-level management position recently, and we had a total of 2 applicants apply, neither of which were qualified applicants. So this is, again, the marketplace telling us that when people are leaving and we're unable to attract them, that's telling us that the organization isn't healthy. And 15% of our positions right now are chronically vacant. So that number is actually down from when I started, but that's showing us that just a little less than 1 in 5 people or positions is not here, and everyone else who does show up to work has to pick up that slack. Another exit interview question. Oh, go ahead, Marie. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. We hear a lot about it being difficult to hire regardless of what the organization is. Is Los Altos an outlier from that, or is this part of the normal? It's hard to find people right now.
So when we talk with the other governments, the turnover that we have is staggering. The number of people we lose and the level of people in the organization that we lose, it's not just an outlier. It's whatever exists beyond that outlier. I can't find another government that has lost anywhere near 72% of its executive management or 50% of its middle management and can operate in a healthy manner. As far as attracting people, where we're different is when we compare with our peer cities for positions that we go out for, we tend to get fewer applicants where the pool is a little less deep, I guess, to put it mildly. Where other organizations may struggle to hire someone in certain positions, we struggle to actually even get them to apply. In a lot of that, what we're finding with the applicants that apply and then don't accept the position here, a lot of that we're finding is because we're a known quantity. People know that Los Altos is a difficult place to work. And even though they may be interested in it, ultimately, they decide to go in another direction with another organization that they see having, I guess, a more complete path for their personal and their professional life. And then again, that's a good segue to are we having people? We're having trouble with people. This was another exit interview. This came from an employee that I really respect. We tried hard to retain this person. But ultimately, their reason for leaving was exactly this. They felt they didn't have the support or the resources to do their job. So this slide is from our employee retreat that we had, and we got everyone together. It was the first time since I've been here that we've been able to do that. And being here almost a year, I was still meeting some people in the organization. I had met most people over email or virtually, but there was a handful of people I hadn't met in person yet. And getting everyone together, and we asked them specific questions about what's our culture, what is it that defines us, what is it that our mission is, what brings us together, and we talked about who's responsible for change. We also asked if what they think the costs are to the way that we choose to operate, and this has always been a really interesting statistic to me that a lot of times we focus on, who our top performers are, and we should. But when you look at where the real cost is to an organization, it's not the people that you can't get from 99 to 100%. It's the people that are disengaged, the people that it's no longer about re-energizing them or getting them to recommit to the work environments. They're actively disengaged in place. And one of the things we started doing as an organization is trying to find the people that have become disengaged or burned out or have maybe lost focus of the mission of work. And we try and talk about what it is that can reactivate you or bring you back into the organization. We got a lot of discussion in the employee retreat about working from home. And we'll talk in a minute about some of the benefits we offer. But when we started studying work from home going into the third year of the pandemic, right, we learned a lot. There's study after study after study that says working from home makes you more productive, it makes you more efficient. But one of the things that is less well studied, right, is that work from home brings a lot of challenges to an organization around collaboration, sharing of information. The thing that I value most highly as a manager is the spontaneous adjustments that you make when you're all together in the office. So the joke I like to make is 3 years into this, we learned that we're making worse decisions, but quicker when we work from home. We're much more efficient, but less collaborative, less able to make adjustments on the fly, and less able to make adjustments when we know something's going wrong. So we have to try and find a way to gain alignment from the benefits that we get from working from home while minimizing the drawbacks. So the big takeaway from the retreat was employees basically want three things to do their job. They want mission, which the organization can supply. They want the tools to do the job, and they want competitive pay and benefits. So what I'll tell council is you can skip 1 and 2 if you go all in on number 3, or maybe you can not do number 3 if you're all in on 1 and 2. But in Los Altos, we've really failed to do each of these 3 things. The mission question, employees couldn't answer outside of their daily job what it is that made them want to work here, what it is that made them feel connected to the organization. On the tools to do the job, we got a lot of comments that were, one guy said, I just want a truck that doesn't catch on fire. Another employee said, I shouldn't have to bring my own tools in to do the work that I do here. We had another employee said they've had a broken chair for 8 months, right? They just want the minimal tools to do the job. And then 3 came up the most: competitive pay and benefits. No one was asking to be a market leader, but they did want pay that reflected their value in the workplace. Now, City Council, to their credit's taken pretty immediate action based on this. And we're going to talk about the changes they made really briefly. But for the organization, the thing that council did that made more of a difference than anything else is council added a goal to the thing that they focus on. They added workforce development as one of their goals, and is very focused right now on attraction and retention of employees. And so one of the things we're doing that I've actually been asked to give a speech on this at one of the national conferences, is we've decided to let employees pick their own schedule. If you want to work a 410, if you want to work a 980 or a 540, which I guess that shorthand of 410 is 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. 980 is 80 hours over 2 weeks, 9 days instead of 10. A 540 is the traditional 8 hours a day, 5 days. We're letting employees pick which schedule is best for them. And then we're adjusting our operations around that. We do allow remote work when possible, but really what we're focusing on is flexible work. A lot of people will talk about work-life balance, but we talk about work-life investment, because at different times you're going to be investing different energy into the different parts of your life, and you're never really going to achieve balance because sometimes you can't be at work because your kid's got a soccer game, right? So you're going to invest in your life at that point. But we know that if we treat an employee appropriately and support them, that they're going to invest in work and get the job done as well. We also spend a lot of time talking about we want to be focused on the person, not the employee. And one of the ways that we did this is councils added a wellness benefit to the organization. And we talk about physical, mental, and emotional support. So with this wellness benefit, if you want to go to the gym, the city will pay for that. But if the big thing in your life is being outdoors, you want a national park, state park membership, the wellness benefit will pay for that. If your commute, because we have so many employees that drive in from a long way, if your commute is the thing that's making your life difficult, the wellness benefit will allow you to get a fast track to make your commute a little bit easier. Benefits like this are kind of emerging in the marketplace, but Los Altos, the way we put it together, is going to be a leader and an innovator in how we sponsor the mental, physical, emotional well-being of our employees. So with all of that said, that comes down to just 3 things for us as the organization. We got to do fewer things, but we have to do them better. We have to prioritize our work better. Both of these things go hand in hand, but in general, we have too few people doing too much work with priorities that are consistently shifting. What was a focus last week is no longer the focus this week, and no one knows what the focus will be next week. So we're spending a lot of time as an organization talking about prioritizing the work that we have and providing better customer service. We're starting to implement this idea is called FOTC. It's called Finding a Way to Say Yes. It actually started with the Arizona Diamondbacks organization. We're talking about how problems are obligations. One of the things that we struggle with here is if you're a resident and you come in, you have an issue, you'll get passed around 16 different times and someone may or may not call you back. What we're saying is if someone comes to you with a problem, it's your obligation to make sure it gets solved, even if you're the one that doesn't solve it. And then the last concept that we're getting ready to roll out, we haven't talked about it yet, is green tape. Everyone's familiar with red tape. There's really interesting studies going on in bureaucracies called green tape. And where red tape is a rule that restricts you from doing something, green tape are the informal rules and structures of the organization that allow you to get things done. So we're talking about how we're freeing people up from bureaucracy and hierarchy to make sure we provide better customer service. So that's the state of the personnel in Los Altos. And if no one has a hand raised, we'll just plow right into budget, which is my favorite and the most exciting thing that we do. So this is not going to be a surprise to anyone. Our past budgets haven't planned for our employees, for our infrastructure, for our assets. I like to say Los Altos is the proud owner of 3 abandoned buildings, 2 of which exist in one of our most heavily visited park. We got so far behind on road maintenance that we almost have to triple our effort just to get the roads back up to what is a considered adequate. And we've just spent a lot of time talking about employees. Before we go through this, because some of the slides get pretty dense and don't look great, I'm giving a Cliff's Notes version. Council has taken action on a lot of these items as we brought them forward. So a lot of the things we'll see here when it came forward to council, they've taken quick and decisive action to try and right the ship from where we're at in the budget. So this is something I showed at the council retreat, and it's just a way to show residents how we had been budgeting. And when we talk about balancing a budget on paper versus reality, this was for our benefits fund. The numbers aren't necessarily as important as what we want to show is that we expected to spend $3.7 million. We expected to bring in $2.1 million, which means that in our budget, even though it was balanced on paper, we reduced our fund balance by $1.6 million in benefits. So through government magic, we turned $2.3 million into $740,000. Had we gone through with that action, it's not just that you can't replicate it, but now you're also not able to pay for the benefits that you've guaranteed to your employees. We look at this again in equipment replacement. I've tried to make it a little bit simpler. We started the budget year with $400,000 in fund balance. We said we're going to spend $1.3 million. Again, only in government can you spend 4 or 3 times more than you have. So even though the budget was balanced on paper, at the end of the year, we were going to have negative $900,000 in our equipment replacement fund. The reason I show this one is the equipment replacement didn't account for the $3 million of defunct fleet equipment that we have. Our sewer vac truck is past its useful life. We don't have an emergency generator from this century. None of that was included in the $1.3 million that we were going to expend. And again, this was for playground equipment. The only number that's important on this slide is the bottom right, 15.4%. When we look at where we're at as an organization, we look at our playground known needs. We've only budgeted for 15% of our known needs. So again, even though our budget's balanced on paper, 85% of the needs in park are going unmet, including not having a playground structure in the city that's within its useful life as we sit here today. And then the last review from the council retreat was our CIP. Council spent a lot of time working on specific projects within the CIP, trying to balance it. What was not made clear to them at the time is that they started the year with a $2 million shortfall. So even after they went through and budgeted everything, because of how we had ended the year last year, we started 2 million short and actually never caught up. So that was all from the council retreat. And one of the things we did after that is we implemented our zero-based budget practice. So we go through and every project, every line item, every expenditure, we have the department directors and managers present. and then talk about why the expense is important. We found some really interesting things. There's some ways that we budget here that really made it difficult to meet our obligations. One of the things we do is we budget for a project and then we don't implement it. So in 2016, we budgeted for a first streetscape project. And this is, we know there's a lot of development going on down there. We know that we haven't completed the streetscape project, so there's going to be a lot of gaps between what existed, what infrastructure existed, and what is being built today. It's going to be really hard at this point to stitch it together. But in 2016, we budgeted $268,000, and every year we've carried those funds forward, but we've only expended $7,000 of it. So what we started talking with the directors about is, if you budget for a project, we have to implement it. And if you're not going to implement it, we have to send the funds back to the general fund. When we told council we were 2 million short on the CIP, that didn't include items like this, where we had a 6-year-old project with budget that we had no intention at that time of completing. Another thing we do is the reverse of this, is we budget something, but we have no project for it. So there were several items I could have pulled out, but the Civic Center is the one that I pulled out again. We're going through a very difficult time in the budget. Sitting in the budget was $750,000 for Civic Center, no defined project. And at the course of the year, we had spent $24,000. So we had $725,000 available for any of the projects, programs, people, equipment, but it was tied up to a budget line item that had no project with it. The other way we do want to look at this is in parks. When I talked earlier about being the proud owner of the 3 abandoned structures, one of them is Halsey House. The other one is a caretaker house in Redwood Grove. And when we went through and we had the conversation when I first started about Halsey House, there was a lot of discussion about where would we get the funds from. We talked about the Grant Park Senior Center, right in the middle of a pandemic, not having hot water in our senior center, not having the electrical capability to plug in multiple things without blowing the circuit breaker. And the conversation always came back to money. But every time we had that conversation, what council hadn't been made aware of is that we had $1 million in parks funds that could go towards any of this that had no project assigned to them. So over the course of the past 3 years, out of this $1 million that we have ready to go, we've only spent $14,000. Those conversations, I think, would have been different had council known the funds they had available to them. And on the Grant Park Senior Center, is actually Councilmember Weinberg. I'm not just giving him a shout out because he's on the call here, but at the last council meeting, he said, bring the Grant Park Senior Center forward, right? It's something we need to fix, and we can use the $1 million we have here to do this. So that's actually in the budget. And then the last and the fourth way that we've really made it difficult to manage our budget is we give projects continuous funding, but there's no project or implementation. So if you look at ADA, there's 2 different line items that we have in our budget, ADA facilities and then ADA for streets. And each year we budget $75,000 into that, and we've accrued a fund balance across both funds of about $1 million. And ADA is an important thing. And if you've been around town, you'll see that we've actually been completing a lot of ADA work, particularly if you see the new sidewalk cuts, the new sidewalk entrances, and how we've done the street crossings. That's meeting our ADA obligations. But the reason this category is interesting is we've budgeted $75,000 a year each year for the past 5 years. We haven't spent much of it, so we're accruing a fund balance, but we've been doing the work, which means that we're actually charging the ADA to another area in our budget. So we're budgeting for things that don't have a project or implementation annually, kind of on autopilot. And again, accruing large fund balances, even though the work is being done and budgeted elsewhere. So as we went through the zero-based budget, we started to correct a lot of these errors. And this is what council's going to see on the 14th. And then after we did that, we turned our attention to this is the only place, the only city I've ever been in where we're going to have to present errors and reconciliation for how we budgeted. One of the ways we balanced our budget was through freezing positions. Council froze 6 positions. But when that came time to put that in the budget, these are the examples we use of how, even though we said they were frozen, they really weren't. And we have to go back and correct this in the budget before we could start to make it whole. The permit technician is an example. Council froze that position, but they froze the position for a person who was here and they were receiving a paycheck and they were processing permits. So we continued to do that. In the budget, we took it out, but in reality, the expenditure took place. One of the things we did in this budget is as I told you earlier, we had a finance manager position vacant. And the idea was we'll hire professional services the first year, and then the second year we'll hire the finance manager so we can get through the budget. In reality, we took both of the expenditures out. So our budget looked really good, but just these 2 line items alone were $400,000 in people that existed and were here today. So even if you don't put them in the budget, you're still paying the bills. In total, we've got about 2 million that we had to reconcile in the budget. I'm not going to go too deep into detail on this, but our sewer fund personnel who work on the sewer should be charged to sewer. What we had been doing is having people clock in, do work on the sewer, and charging them to the general fund. So that's an example of property taxpayers subsidizing ratepayers. And we had this across the board. It was happening in IT. We hadn't updated some of our CPI stuff since 2012. But the big story there is that before we could get started on this budget, we had to reconcile about $4 million in budget errors, which is about 8% of our general fund in total. We had reported incorrectly. And then that 4 million is in addition to the things that we were reporting correctly. They were just things that we shouldn't be doing, right? We shouldn't be spending down our benefits fund, 800,000, or fleet and equipment, 300,000 more than we have funds to pay for it. And our general fund, we should never be in a position where we're at 15.6% of fund balance. And the idea of the general fund balance is to be flexible and respond to a crisis. In California, you have to be able to respond to multiple crises. So say in the middle of a pandemic, you have an earthquake or you have any other event. At this point, your government is incapable of providing an appropriate response. So this budget is a transitional budget. We have to be really disciplined as an organization moving forward. The budget itself is going to have a surplus. It's going to do a lot of things, but we have almost 3 million in expenditure reductions that we can't replicate. We've got more than $1 million in one-time reconciliation revenue that we're not going to get again. The federal government really propped us up going into the pandemic. We received $4 million in the current budget year. We'll receive $4 million next year. Those checks aren't coming anymore. So when we talk about the crisis exposing what is unknown about the organization, our financial health, how we've managed our city, where we've been, has not been good. And we're at the point now where if we don't become disciplined, we've hit the old Shel Silverstein book for any librarians out there, where the sidewalk ends. That's where we're at. We're at the end of the sidewalk. We can't do any of this stuff again next year. So moving forward, we have to be disciplined on our expenditures. We have to prioritize our work, and we're going to have to do fewer things better. So one of the things I always like to remind council, a budget's a process, not an event. They're going to adopt a budget for the coming year, but getting Los Altos healthy is going to take 2 or 3 full budget cycles to work through this. And if we're not able to really stick to our work plan, if we change our priorities, if we shift where we're going, we're not going to get there. And we're not going to have the benefit of the things that helped us get through the pandemic. So for me, that's it on the presentation. Happy to take questions, comments, or anything in between. So let me stop the share.
This is David, just saying that I'll be moderating the questions, so please raise your hand and I will call on each speaker with a question. Also, if you could limit, I'd like to get as many different people asking questions, so ask one and then we'll go on to the next person where they can ask one. Pete Daly.
Hey, Gabe, thanks for the presentation. What are we going to do on the revenue side, right? I mean, the whole presentation is about the cost side of the ledger. It seems to me that part of the solution has to be increased revenues.
Yeah, so you're correct about that. One of the first things we talk about, though, as an organization is we control expenditures. We don't control revenue. So one of the ways that this budget is a little bit more healthy is we took and tried to make realistic revenue projections. So there's this idea that you want to be conservative, right? And you want to, it's okay if you budget less for property tax and you overshoot it because then you get free money. But what we say is if you're not realistic, then you're actually going to short yourself on the services you need to provide. So the budget is going to show an increase of property tax of about $3.5 million. One of the things that we look at on the revenue side around sales tax and our hotel taxes is that's based on people's expenditure habits. And one of the things we're tracking really closely is the inflation. We know that it's been really bad over the past several months. What I don't think a lot of people are taking into account is the federal government's about to drop several hundred billions of dollars back into local governments in the next month. So some of the expected revenue increases are going to get eaten up there. But we are tracking the revenue. We're using HDL projections, which we hadn't used before, and we're trying to be realistic as opposed to saying, well, if we get more, that's a good thing. So that I think that's a great point. Overall, I think we end with about $4 million in revenue higher this year than what we had projected in the initial budget.
Thanks, Gabe. Janine Valadez.
Good morning, Gabe. Thank you for your speech. Question, it's back on employees. I'm sorry I didn't ask earlier. To what extent, in terms of the difficulties in retaining or hiring employees, does the use or the implementation of part-time jobs versus full-time positions come into play, or is it not a factor?
So for it is a factor. You're going to retain in general part-time employees for a shorter period of time, right? Most people in the workforce, in our workforce in government anyway, are looking for a full-time job. And if we're hiring you part-time, the idea should be it's to complete part-time work, right? What we got into this bad habit in Los Altos of doing was hiring part-time people and then trying to treat them like full-time employees or giving them the work of a full-time employee. We actually had a number of employees in this budget that for whatever reason, we scheduled at 38 hours instead of 40 hours per week. And that was the city, quite frankly, trying to get around going to council, I think, to get the positions authorized. But that certainly, you're correct, that certainly has played a big role in some of the turnover numbers we've seen organizationally, not for management or executive management, those are full-time positions, but for the frontline employees, that's certainly playing a factor.
Kim Cranston.
Hi, Gabe. Thanks for the excellent briefing. I'm curious, with the focus being on fewer things and prioritizing, which I totally agree with. And given that some things are legally mandated, such as a housing element, what do you see as the top things that you have to do, either because of legal mandates or otherwise?
Well, and I think that's the first level of our, when we say do fewer things better, the first level of things we can't get rid of are the mandates. And in California, there's a ton of mandates. But, you know, the things that we don't get around, the mandates, the regulations, RENA's a great example. That in and of itself is a body of work that the entire organization has to undertake that at this time last year or 18 months ago, it wasn't focused on. So as we move forward, does that mean we're going to continue to do business as usual with the resources as usual? It's not possible. In planning, that's one of the areas when we talk about the zero-based budget that we've actually added a lot of resources. So without increasing the budget, we've been able to take over-resourced areas and actually provide an additional permit tech, an additional planner, and we focus those on the customer service aspect. So when you come in, you can get a permit handed to you over the counter or turned around in a few days, as opposed to the 30 days that it took previously. And we're doing that in context of completing RENA, completing that mandate. So when we talk about the shift in focus, a lot of times that'll show up in our CIP, not in our mandates, where we put a budget out, we say this is what we're going to work on, and then 6 weeks into the budget year, well, now we're going to work on these 4 other things. So those are the things we're trying to eliminate. We really want to focus on council goals, council priorities, and then not focus on the other stuff to the extent possible.
Thank you. Kathy Lazarus.
Thanks, David. In your presentation, you spoke about a lot of unexpended balances, particularly in the capital area. I would imagine there's a cause and effect that because you had so many vacancies, you were not able, that the city was not able to actually execute the project. So how will you adjust for that moving forward as you begin to staff up? And was it a question of lack of resources, or was it a lack of well-defined project scope?
Well, I think so it's a little bit, right, of all of that, but the examples we used didn't have anything to do with staffing or resources. So the ADA slide I showed, for example, we complete the ADA work on all of our projects. So that was just an example of bad budgeting. We do the street project, we do the ADA work with it, but we also budgeted for it. And the reason we didn't expend anything from it was because we had completed the work on another project. So we just, as an organization, we just went into autopilot and kept putting $75,000 into this fund every year, even though it was being budgeted in another area. The CIP, to me, it shows a few things. One, it shows that as an organization, things that were really important to us during budget became less important during practice, right? The first streetscape, I use that because staff, the oral history is we couldn't get council to agree on if we wanted to go forward with it or not. So we put it in the budget in 2016. We had the conversation in 2017, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. We never got agreement. So the money sits there. It's not that we didn't have the staff to complete it. It's as an organization, we didn't know if we wanted to complete it. And then the other one in that we show in parks, that's an example of, again, not resourcing, but not planning. We would drop $1 million in that example into the parks budget, and we'd say, oh, well, we're going to figure out what that goes for later. All the time, not having a plan for our playscapes, not having a plan for Grant Park Senior Center, not having a plan for Caretaker House, Halsey House, and the list goes on, and the $1 million just sits there. And we're having conversations as a city about, well, what do we do about these things? And instead of planning for what we actually do and how we fix them, we just didn't do it. So it's not a resource issue. It's an alignment issue, in my opinion.
Good Q and good A there. Joe Beninado.
Thanks, David. Gabe, when I last saw you about a month ago, I asked about legal fees, and they had recently gone from about 3 million up to 3.75, and I heard now we're up to 4. Is there an end in sight? I don't know what you can do as a city manager to help steer the council to avoid future lawsuits, but things like the wireless ordinance and/or we have a housing element where hopefully we will be in compliance. But where are we on legal fees, and what can you do to help keep us on course?
So on legal fees, we're going to go to council at the next meeting on the 14th, and we're going to ask them to increase the legal fee budget by $1 million, and those are for costs that we've incurred. So it's not we think we're going to spend $1 million more this year before July 1. It's that we've already incurred $1 million in additional costs from what's been budgeted. So as a city manager, my primary role when I talk with council is I counsel them on a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, this is a lawsuit that we can win. We'll win this lawsuit. And I try and frame it a little differently. I say, well, think about it. Are you saying we're going to prevail, or are you saying we're going to win? Because if we win, that means we get something tangible. But a lot of times we get in a situation where winning means we spend a lot of money not to change anything. We spend a lot of money not to change what the outcome is going to be anyway. So I try and get council to focus on that. The second thing we can do is bring transparency to the budget. When we started, we had a terrible practice of we would put a legal expenditure in the budget. And then if we exceeded that, we would collect everything after the budget was closed and we put it in our audit. And it's not that it wasn't legal, it's that no one's going to look for budgeted expenditures 14 months after they happen in a different document that residents tend to not be familiar with. So one of the changes we made in our purchasing policy was to come in line with best practices, transparent government, and say that if you're going to exceed a budget amount in any item, not just legal, in any item, the council has to approve that budget increase. And that's why council has to vote on the $1 million increase in a week and a half.
Thanks, Gabe, for that was a question. I'm jumping in here because I was going to ask the same question, but also just a related question. Do you feel the current city attorney has made it clear, and this might put you on the spot to answer, but has made it clear enough to city council people that their actions, especially with negating the votes of all their commissions, their sort of unilateral actions to say no to things that are legally, that they shouldn't be saying no to, that there's a possible risk and a possible consequence.
Sorry, you were just taking a break. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, I'm referring to the unfortunate votes by city council on the 40 Main Street and other housing projects, that they ignored laws and just went off their own personal agendas.
So I think without commenting on specific votes, one of the changes the city attorney and I have made is in the staff report. Previously, it would be presented as council you have an option. You can say yes, you can say no, you can say maybe. What we're trying to present when it's a state law is that you're required to approve this, right? And we see it a lot with the new Senate bill or state bills 9 or SB 35 or all of that. But our practices still, as we sit here today, haven't caught up with the mandates yet. And we're still debating things at a policy level that are settled law. And we'll spend a lot of time talking with people about things that we can't control or change, but withholding an approval on that, even though ultimately that approval is coming one way or the other. We can do it, or a court can do it for us. So I think the city attorney does an exceptional job of explaining the legal realities to council.
That's great to hear. I also want to mention it's 9:30, so we understand people might have to leave, but if Gabe, if you're okay with staying.
I'm good till 10, yeah.
Okay, great. Then we'll go on with questions and answers. To anyone who has to leave, thanks very much for attending. I saw Dean just sent us a text, he had to leave. Next up is Gary Hedden.
Thank you, David. Kim Cranston asked about the top priorities, so I'm going to ask the more difficult question. What are the things that are likely to drop off the list of priorities? I'm particularly concerned about the climate action and adaptation plan.
So the climate action adaptation plan was adopted by council. So that's not going to drop off, right? That's where we're focused on that. We actually have changed our organization to have a utility environmental services department and director. And that person is focused on CAP. We added in this budget, not only that director position, we added two, well, I don't know the second position yet. The first one will be the environmental sustainability coordinator. My guess is there's going to be below that person a management analyst type position that's focused on CAP, but also focused on the other thing that we hear council talk about a lot is grant funding, securing things for not only environmental action, but for transportation, for things in that area. So we're changing the focus of the organization to be responsive to the things council adopts. So climate action adaptation plan, council's going to adopt, I think, next month, the Complete Streets Master Plan. We put a ton of funding into that. So we're going to bring in a CIP manager to manage that. Council's adopted the principles of the downtown vision. So again, we're focusing it in that area. So when we went through and we talked about the things that come off the list, one of the biggest ones that we took off in this budget was the Emergency Operations Center. That was going to be a huge organizational lift, and we desperately need one. We don't have an EOC right now that's earthquake safe or that's sufficient. But what we found was when we built the community center, that was built to house an EOC. So the primary amount of work in the community center for the EOC had been done. The only work that was left really was adding a generator. So instead of building a standalone EOC that would have been inadequate and not met our needs, we're able to save $2 million by putting in an EOC where an EOC has already been built. So when we talk about things that come off, priorities that come off, that's the first level, right? Things that we can do differently or better. Some of the other things that got moved down the list in this budget had to do with stormwater management. We had some projects that would have been a big organizational lift. We thought they were going to cost about $600,000 based on engineers' estimate. They came back at 1.2 million. So we decided to rework our RFP, move those items off the list. So to the extent practical, we try and remove the things that we can do different or better, or we try and remove the things that have the least amount of impact on the residents as a whole.
Thank you.
Janine.
Hi, I had a philosophical question for you. In terms of looking at the CIP, there are a lot of areas for, I have a big focus on the playground and place and usability, accessibility. I don't like to use the word ADA because I know we're compliant, but accessibility enhancements. But it also applies to things like the Grant Park Center, et cetera. What is your philosophy and how do you manage down on this and also up on this in terms of bold and large investments in CIP versus something that's more focused on more immediate service to the residents, customers, in terms of a more incrementalist type of philosophy, incremental investments. And I'm not using that word in a negative fashion, I'm using it in a positive fashion. What's your philosophical balance between those two?
I love philosophical questions. They're especially around service. Those are the best. In Los Altos, the first thing we have to do is take care of what we have, and we haven't done that. So if we have, again, not one playscape in town that's within its useful life, we have to start replacing those. And the Parks and Rec Commission in their work plan put out a very, very good work plan to start doing this, right? I think we're starting in Shelp and then moving through them. We also have to take care of the things, the senior center. We have to find a resolution on Halsey House. We have to find a resolution on the caretaker's house. These are all things that we have to do before we can start having that discussion about expanding parks opportunities, right? Or adding amenities, or when we talk about where we start as a community, the first thing we need to do in Los Altos is stop digging the hole, right? And once we figure out our way out of the hole, then I think we can have this conversation that the community really deserves to have about how do we ensure access? How do we not just do the minimum on ADA, but actually make parks accessible to everyone? And one of the things that I think the Parks and Rec Commission did that was very good is, in addition to creating this plan for our parks and our playscapes and our replacement, they started talking, and I know so I know I'm talking to one of the commissioners. One of the things they did is they started talking about this idea of making sure we have access in our parks for everyone, and doing the incremental steps that make things a lot better, even though it's not the ultimate solution. So adding different types of picnic tables or swings, different ground cover that make sure everyone can enjoy the park. I think we've struck a good balance where we're going, but the unfortunate thing is we've dug ourselves so deep that before we can start really engaging in that conversation about what's best for everyone, we have to stop the things that are worst for everyone. Just can't have playscapes beyond their useful life with no plan for replacement. You can't have 2 abandoned structures in one of your most heavily visited parks. It's not something you can do and also operate a healthy park system.
Thanks, Gabe. We're going to take 2 more questions, and I see 2 more hands up. Ginny Lear.
Yes, thank you, Gabe. I really appreciate the answer to that last question. How many employees do we actually have in Los Altos? And my question is about is anyone in charge of happiness? It might be you, but maybe you have an assistant happiness director. I just think the goal to be very visible to them that everybody's really trying, and it can't happen at once, but is there such a thing happening?
So yeah, organizationally, the culture here is really improving. I was actually just talking with an employee yesterday. She's one of our longest serving employees. She's been here about 14 years. And we were talking about how a year ago, this was a really hard place to work. And a lot of people would talk about how they didn't want to come to work here. I had one employee telling me how they would just sit in the parking lot when we did, and they get a knot in their stomach the night before work. They'd sit in the parking lot. They didn't want to go in the building. They didn't like it. We are talking now about, as an organization, what is our culture? What's our identity? And we're focused on the employees first. So one of the things I tell the organization is, a lot of people say the customer is always right. I'm going to tell you it's the employee is always right. And what we mean by that is, if we treat employees appropriately, we empower them to make decisions, we give them the tools to do the job, they're going to treat the customers and the residents correctly. So we don't have a chief happiness officer, but everyone is engaged in making this a better place to work. And it actually feels pretty good here right now. So the first question about how many employees work here, it's a trick question. Only in Los Altos is a trick question. So we we were going forward to council and through the zero-based budget process, I had intended to tell them I've added the CIP manager position, the planner, everything we talked about is 6 or 7 positions. And I've done it without adding to the budget or adding to the organization. But as we went through this, we started finding a bunch of people that were here that weren't included in the head count. So we had an employee who had been here, I think, for 5 years. And in the budget, she showed up as meals ready to eat, showed up as part of a police car. Just weird how it was budgeted so well. That increases the number. We found an employee who was listed as IT supplies. Clearly, she's not an IT supply. We really enjoy her, but that added to the FTE count. So at the end, we have 149 budgeted positions, and that is going to be 6 higher than what council saw last budget at 143. But the reality is those 6 positions and 2 more were people that were here that were getting a paycheck that were never reported as a person to council. And I did give the finance director, I said, you're stealing my narrative, man. The zero-based budget was supposed to reduce this stuff. You're making me increase it. But it's people that were here that are doing a good job. So we just want to report it transparently and accurately.
Great. And Steve Lazarus, you had your hand up and it's not up now. So I just wanted to make sure you didn't have a question.
Yeah, Jenny, my question essentially was covered by Jenny's.
Great. I want to thank Gabe profusely for the presentation and especially for your transparency. It really is, it's wonderful to have a city manager who tells the bad news as well as the good news and is prepared for all the crazy stuff that happens and comes down the pike when you're trying to manage a city in the world we live in today. So Los Altos LACC thanks you, a lot for giving this presentation. Thanks everyone for the great questions and for your attendance. I wanted to announce we're excited about our next session on June 17th. Santa Clara County Supervisor Joe Smidian is going to speak on the state of Santa Clara County. So we're going to go from the state of Los Altos to the state of the county. And a peek into the future, we're working on state of the state with requesting presentations by our our state representatives. On July 1st, Nick Zorns, the Los Altos Development Service Director, is going to do a presentation on the Los Altos housing element. What is it and why is it so important? We know that a lot of people there's a lot of unknown, the community just isn't aware of what the housing element is, doesn't really understand it. So we were hoping to get this on the agenda. So that's exciting. It's on the July 1st agenda. And finally, we want to thank the Los Altos Mountain View Community Foundation for providing LACC with financial and in-kind support. We couldn't be here without it. And we couldn't be here without all of you as coming to these Zoom webinars and participating for your organizations and for yourselves as residents. So thanks very much from all of us on the steering committee. And with that, we look forward to seeing everybody hopefully on 2 weeks from today on June 17th, same time, same channel for that presentation by Joe Smidian. And one more plug to subscribe to our YouTube channel because we want to be able to have a robust presentation of all of these webinars for the public. Thanks so much.